Insist on the revised contract terms immediately.
Oh, absolutely stunning. The security detail seems rather on edge tonight, don't you think?
The words weren't the polished soul dialect of a businessman. It was the jagged coastal cadence of Busan, the same rough rhythm Zora's father had used when the world was burning down around them. Zora froze. Two men in tactical tuxedos were adjusting silencers, their eyes fixed on the man leaning back in the leather chair. Renzo Lucia, the dragon of the East Coast. He was reaching for a glass of poisoned scotch. Zora's pulse hammered against her ribs. She should walk away. She should stay invisible. But as Renzo's fingers closed around the crystal glass, Zora dropped her tray. The crash drew every eye, but she was already moving. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She lunged, grabbing the most dangerous man in the city by his collar, and pressed her lips to his. The room went lethal cold, but as she kissed him, she whispered 6 words that changed everything. Zora Thorne had learned long ago that the safest place in a dangerous room was where no one bothered to look. So she moved like she belonged to the background. Her black vest blended with the shadows. The white of her shirt caught just enough light to signal service, not presence. Guests glanced past her, through her, as if she were part of the furniture that kept their world running smoothly. It was exactly how she preferred it. The underground gala glittered with quiet power. Crystal chandeliers spilled warm gold across polished marble floors. Soft violin music threaded through conversations too careful to be recorded and too expensive to be repeated. Wealth moved in confident circles, men with guarded smiles, women with measured laughter, security stationed in places that didn't look like security. Zora drifted between them, tray balanced effortlessly in one hand. "Champagne, sir." The man took a glass without looking at her. "Thank you." He didn't wait for her reply. He was already turning back to the conversation, his voice lowering as he leaned closer to his companion. Zora didn't linger, but she noticed the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers tapped twice against the glass before he drank. Nervous. Not unusual in a room like this, but she stored it away anyway. Observation wasn't about single details. It was about patterns. She crossed toward the far side of the room, passing beneath a mirrored column. The reflection gave her a wider view without forcing her to turn her head. 3 bodyguards stood near the main entrance. One checked the room in steady intervals. Another remained still, scanning exits. The third shifted his weight too often. New, or uncomfortable. Her eyes moved on. Near the balcony, a man in a charcoal suit stood slightly apart from the others. He held a drink, but the level in his glass hadn't changed since she first noticed him. His gaze drifted across the crowd, slow and deliberate, like he was memorizing faces. Zora stepped closer, offering her tray. "Would you like?" "No." His voice came too quickly, too sharp. His eyes flicked to her, assessing, then dismissed her just as fast. Zora nodded politely and moved away. Another detail stored. She passed the center of the room, where laughter rose louder. A woman in a crimson dress leaned against a marble pillar, her smile bright, but her shoulders tight. She touched her earring once, then again, then let her hand fall. Signal? Or habit? Zora circled again, adjusting her pace to appear natural. The music shifted, softer now, as more guests gathered near the main tables. And there he was, Renzo Lucia. Even seated, he commanded the space around him. Dark suit, perfectly tailored. Posture relaxed, but not careless. His bodyguard stood far enough away to appear casual, close enough to react instantly. People approached him carefully, each interaction brief, respectful, measured. Power didn't need to announce itself. It simply existed. Zora moved past his table, offering champagne to a passing guest. She didn't look directly at him, but she felt the quiet gravity surrounding his presence. Untouchable. That's what everyone believed. Her eyes shifted again, scanning the room. The man near the balcony checked his watch. The woman in crimson adjusted her earring once more. The nervous guard near the entrance repositioned, subtly blocking a secondary exit. Zora's steps slowed by half a fraction, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for her mind to connect the threads. Something in the room had shifted. The rhythm felt wrong. And Zora Thorne had learned to trust that feeling, because in places like this, the smallest change often came just before everything fell apart. Zora slowed her pace, letting the tray settle against her palm as she moved between two clusters of guests. The violinist shifted into a softer melody, the kind meant to encourage quieter conversations. It gave her the cover she needed to listen without appearing to listen. The rhythm of the room had changed. Subtle, almost invisible, but once she noticed it, she couldn't unsee it. The man near the balcony checked his watch again, not casually this time. His thumb brushed the rim twice, then once more after a short pause. 2, 1. Zora's pulse tightened. That wasn't nervous habit. That was structure. She continued walking, her expression calm as she approached a group of executives. One accepted a drink, another waved her away. She moved past them smoothly, her eyes catching reflections in the polished marble floor. Across the room, the woman in crimson adjusted her earring again. This time, she turned slightly toward Renzo's table while doing it. Then she laughed, too loudly, too suddenly, and stepped aside as another waiter passed. The waiter didn't look at her, but his pace slowed, just slightly. Zora's fingers tightened beneath the tray. Signal acknowledged. Her breathing remained steady, but her mind sharpened. She had seen this before. Not here, not in this city. But the structure was familiar. Layered confirmation, indirect contact, multiple participants who didn't appear connected. Clean, professional, dangerous. She pivoted toward the bar, her steps measured. The waiter from before reached the counter and leaned in close to the bartender. Their conversation lasted only a second. The bartender nodded once, then reached beneath the counter. Zora angled her tray as she passed, catching the reflection in a silver ice bucket. A new glass placed aside, not part of the regular rotation. Her stomach tightened. The bartender lifted the glass carefully, holding it separate from the others. His movements were smooth, practiced. He set it on a small black tray and handed it back to the waiter. No eye contact, no hesitation. The waiter turned and headed toward Renzo Lucia. Zora's pulse began to hammer. She adjusted her route, moving parallel to him, her face composed as she offered drinks to passing guests. The distance between them narrowed slowly, naturally, nothing forced. She studied the glass. Clear liquid, no visible difference, but there, just along the rim, a faint, nearly invisible mark. A thin silver line. Zora's breath caught. That was the signal, not the poison itself. Confirmation.
Target identified. Delivery in motion. Her chest tightened as the pieces aligned. The man near the balcony shifted his stance, turning slightly toward Renzo's table. The woman in crimson stepped back, clearing the line of sight between them. The nervous guard near the entrance moved again, subtly blocking another exit. The room was being shaped. Controlled. Prepared. Zora's mind raced through timing. Delivery first. Then confirmation. Then execution if needed. This wasn't just poison. This was a layered kill. Her eyes flicked toward Renzo. He was speaking calmly to a man beside him, unaware of the invisible net tightening around him. His posture relaxed, his attention focused elsewhere. Untouchable. That's what everyone believed. But Zora saw the truth forming in the silence between movements. The waiter was only steps away now. Her heartbeat pounded louder in her ears. She should walk away. This wasn't her fight. People who interfered in operations like this didn't get second chances. They didn't get warnings. They disappeared. The waiter reached Renzo's table. He lowered the tray slightly, preparing to offer the glass. Zora felt time compress. And then she saw one more detail. The man near the balcony slipped something small from his sleeve. Metal glinted briefly beneath the chandelier light. Backup. If the poison failed. Zora's chest tightened. This wasn't just an attempt. It was certainty. Renzo Lucia was marked for death. And unless someone intervened, he wouldn't survive the next few minutes. The waiter lowered the tray. Champagne, Mr. Lucia. Renzo glanced up, distracted, still half-turned toward the man beside him. His fingers moved casually toward the glass, the gesture effortless, automatic, something he'd done 1,000 times in rooms just like this. Zora felt the world narrow. Her pulse slammed hard against her ribs. No. Not yet. Renzo's fingers brushed the stem, lifting the glass from the tray. The waiter stepped back smoothly, disappearing into the flow of guests as if he'd never been there. Clean delivery. Zora shifted her position, moving closer to a nearby table while pretending to adjust a set of empty glasses. Her eyes tracked Renzo without staring. He raised the drink halfway. Paused. Someone approached him, a gray-haired man in a navy suit, smiling politely, offering a handshake. Renzo lowered the glass slightly, accepting the greeting. Zora exhaled slowly. Delay. But not safety. Her gaze swept the room again. The man near the balcony had gone completely still now, his posture angled, his focus sharp. One hand rested casually against the railing, but the tension in his shoulders gave him away. Waiting. The woman in crimson stepped further back, blending into a group near the marble pillar. Her smile returned, but her eyes flicked toward Renzo every few seconds. Monitoring. The backup was still in place. Zora's stomach tightened. They weren't rushing. They were confident. That meant the poison was fast. Very fast. Renzo finished the handshake, nodding once. The gray-haired man stepped away, and Renzo lifted the glass again, this time bringing it closer to his lips. Zora's fingers curled around the tray. She counted. 3 minutes. Maybe less. If the toxin was neuroactive, he wouldn't collapse immediately. First, subtle symptoms. Breathing changes. Muscle weakness. Confusion. Then. Her chest tightened. Renzo tilted the glass. The rim touched his lips. He drank. Only a small sip. But enough. Zora felt a cold wave move through her. It was done. The countdown had started. Renzo set the glass back on the table, continuing his conversation as if nothing had changed. His posture remained relaxed, confident, unaware of the silent clock now ticking against him. 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Zora moved again, circling slowly, her face calm despite the rising tension inside her. She needed confirmation. Needed to see the reaction. Her eyes flicked back to the balcony. The man there checked his watch. Once. Then he relaxed slightly, almost satisfied. Confirmation received. Zora's pulse accelerated. 2 minutes and 20 seconds. Renzo shifted in his chair, adjusting his cuff. A small movement. Almost nothing. But Zora noticed. His breathing had changed. Slightly slower. Barely visible. The first symptom. Across the room, the woman in crimson touched her earring again, then lowered her hand. Second confirmation. Zora's heart pounded louder. 2 minutes. Renzo leaned back, his conversation fading as his focus drifted. His fingers rested against the table, tapping once, then stopping. Something felt wrong. He didn't know what. Not yet. But the toxin was working. Zora's mind raced. She still had time. Not much. But enough to intervene. The man near the balcony shifted again, his hand slipping briefly inside his jacket. The metallic glint returned, small, precise, ready. Backup still active. If Renzo showed any resistance, they'd finish it manually. 1 minute and 30 seconds. Zora stepped closer, weaving through the crowd, her breathing controlled. Every movement needed to look natural. Every second mattered. Renzo rubbed his throat subtly, his brows tightening for a fraction of a second. There. He felt it now. The beginning. 1 minute. The room continued laughing, drinking, unaware that one of the most powerful men in the city was slowly dying in front of them. Zora stopped 3 steps behind him. Her pulse thundered. She had no safe way to warn him. No coded message he'd recognize. No private moment. Only one option remained. 50 seconds. Renzo reached for the glass again. And Zora made her decision. Renzo's fingers closed around the glass again. His movements were slower now. Barely noticeable to anyone who didn't know what to look for. But Zora saw the stiffness in his wrist, the faint delay in his grip. The toxin was spreading. 40 seconds. The man near the balcony shifted his weight, his focus sharpening. The woman in crimson angled her body slightly, clearing space between Renzo and the nearest guests. They were preparing for the collapse. Zora's pulse roared in her ears. There was no time left. She stepped forward. 1 step. Calm. Controlled. Another. A guest moved aside, barely noticing her. A server brushed past her shoulder, muttering an apology. The music swelled softly, masking the sound of her approach. 30 seconds. Renzo lifted the glass again, his gaze unfocused for a fraction of a second. His jaw tightened, as if he were trying to shake off an unexpected wave of dizziness. He didn't understand yet. But he would soon. Too soon. Zora moved behind him, close enough now to see the faint tension in his neck, the subtle sheen of warmth gathering along his collar. The poison was working faster than she'd hoped. 20 seconds. Her mind raced through outcomes. If she spoke openly, the assassins would react instantly. If she alerted his guards, they might not believe her in time. If she did nothing, Renzo would be dead within moments. Her chest tightened. No safe options. Only dangerous ones. 10 seconds. Renzo's hand trembled slightly as he brought the glass toward his lips again. That was when Zora acted. She stepped forward sharply, dropping her tray onto the nearest table. The soft clatter barely registered beneath the music. Her hand grabbed the front of Renzo's jacket, fingers curling firmly into the fabric. The sudden contact froze him. Before his guards could react, she pulled him forward and kissed him. The room seemed to stop breathing. Guests nearby fell silent, confusion rippling outward in slow waves. A glass paused halfway to someone's lips. A conversation died mid-sentence. Zora felt the heat of Renzo's surprise, the instinctive tension in his body as he registered what was happening. His hand tightened reflexively against the chair, his breath catching for a fraction of a second. She leaned closer, her lips brushing his just enough to sell the illusion. But her voice dropped to a whisper only he could hear. Poison. Neurotoxin. Balcony, gray suit. Backup armed. 30 seconds before collapse. She felt his body go still. Not shocked. Not panicked. Calculating. Good. She shifted slightly, maintaining the illusion, her hand still gripping his jacket. You already drank, she whispered softly. Slow your breathing. Don't stand suddenly. Your right side will weaken first. His fingers brushed her wrist lightly. A subtle movement. Acknowledgement. Across the room, Zora sensed movement. The man near the balcony had straightened, his attention snapping toward them. The woman in crimson's smile faltered, uncertainty flickering across her face. They hadn't expected this. Good. Zora pulled back slowly, her expression softening into something that looked like embarrassment, like a reckless mistake made in the heat of the moment. Her hand released his jacket. The room exhaled. A few guests chuckled awkwardly. Someone whispered. One of Renzo's bodyguards stepped forward, tense and ready. But Renzo lifted a hand slightly. Stop. The guard froze. Zora lowered her gaze, stepping back, her face calm despite the storm racing inside her. Renzo leaned back in his chair, his eyes now fully open, sharp and cold as they tracked the room. He didn't look at her again. But he didn't need to. Because now, he knew he was about to die. And more importantly, he knew exactly who wanted him dead. For a fraction of a second, Renzo Lucia didn't move. Zora felt it, the controlled stillness of a man whose entire world had just shifted, yet refused to show it. His lips remained against hers just long enough to make the moment believable to anyone watching. But beneath that stillness, she sensed the sharp intelligence working behind his calm. Good. He wasn't panicking. She tilted her head slightly, maintaining the illusion, her voice barely more than breath. You were marked 3 minutes ago, she whispered. Glass from the bar. Silver rim marking. Fast neurotoxin. His breathing slowed instantly. Not fear. Discipline. She continued, her words precise, controlled. Gray suit at the balcony confirmed delivery. Crimson dress cleared line of sight. Waiter was just transport. Real trigger is backup. Renzo's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly against the armrest. He understood. Zora shifted slightly, her hand still gripping his collar, her posture intimate enough to hide the tension between them. You've already absorbed enough, she murmured. You'll feel weakness in your right hand first, then your throat tightens. Don't stand too quickly. They're waiting for collapse. She felt the subtle change in his breathing. Slower. Measured. He was following her instructions. Across the room, she could sense eyes turning toward them, confusion rippling through the carefully controlled environment. The man near the balcony had straightened slightly, suspicion flickering across his face. They hadn't planned for disruption. Zora leaned closer, her lips brushing his again to maintain the illusion. One more thing, she whispered. Backup weapon. Small metallic device. Wrist level. He'll use it if the toxin fails. Renzo's eyes shifted slightly, not toward the balcony directly, but toward the reflection in the polished glass centerpiece on the table. Careful. He was good. Very good. Zora felt a flicker of something unexpected, respect. She pulled back slightly, just enough to create the appearance of a lingering, impulsive kiss rather than a calculated exchange. Her expression softened, as if she had just realized what she'd done. But before she stepped away, she whispered one final sentence. They expect you to fall within 30 seconds. Renzo's fingers brushed her wrist again. A silent acknowledgement. His skin felt warmer now, the toxin already moving through his system. She could see it in the faint tension along his jaw, the slight stiffness in his posture. Time was running out. She slowly released his collar, stepping back, her gaze lowering as if embarrassed by her sudden boldness. Around them, the room exhaled in quiet confusion. A few guests exchanged amused glances, misreading the moment as reckless flirtation. But Renzo didn't react with anger. He didn't call his guards. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp, scanning the room with a new intensity. Zora turned slightly, retreating into the flow of movement once more, her tray still abandoned on the nearby table. She picked up another from a passing server, blending seamlessly back into her role. Invisible again. But everything had changed. The man in the gray suit shifted uneasily near the balcony, his attention now fixed on Renzo. The woman in crimson smiled again, but it looked forced, her eyes flickering between them. They were uncertain now. Their perfect plan had been disturbed. Zora moved calmly through the crowd, her heartbeat still fast but her expression composed. She didn't look back at Renzo, but she could feel the shift in the air around him. He knew. He was ready. And somewhere beneath the tension, Zora realized something else. Renzo Lucia wasn't just surviving. He was already hunting. The countdown hadn't stopped. But now, the target wasn't just Renzo anymore. It was whoever had tried to kill him. Renzo Lucia didn't react immediately. That alone told Zora he was dangerous in ways most people never understood. A lesser man would have panicked. Called guards. Stood abruptly. Made a scene. Any one of those moves would have triggered the backup. Instead, Renzo picked up his glass again. His hand looked steady to anyone watching. But Zora saw the faint stiffness in his fingers. The subtle delay before he set the glass back down without drinking. He believed her. Or at least, he was testing her. His eyes swept the room lazily, as if bored by the evening. But Zora noticed how his gaze lingered half a second longer near the balcony. The man in the gray suit. Then Renzo shifted slightly in his chair, adjusting his cuff. A small movement. Calculated. His right hand paused midway. Weakness. The toxin was progressing exactly as she predicted. Zora continued moving through the room, offering drinks to a cluster of guests, but her attention remained fixed on him through reflections and peripheral glances. Renzo leaned back, his breathing controlled, measured. A faint tension touched his jaw, then vanished. He masked it well, but not well enough for someone watching as closely as Zora. 30 seconds passed. The man near the balcony checked his watch again. His expression tightened slightly. He expected Renzo to collapse by now. Across the room, the woman in crimson shifted her weight, her smile thinning as uncertainty crept in. Renzo reached for the table again. His fingers brushed the edge, then steadied. Testing his own control. Smart. He tilted his head slightly, as if stretching his neck, but Zora saw the purpose behind it. He was gauging the tightening in his throat, measuring the toxin's progress. Then, without looking directly at her, Renzo tapped the table once. Soft. Subtle. One of his bodyguards, stationed several feet away, shifted closer, casually, naturally, as if responding to nothing more than instinct. Renzo was repositioning his defense. He believed her. Barely. Zora exhaled slowly, relief threading through the tension in her chest. If he had dismissed her warning, he would already be halfway to collapse. But now he was adapting. The man in the gray suit adjusted his stance, his attention sharpening. His hand slipped briefly inside his sleeve, the metallic glint appearing again. Backup still ready. Renzo noticed. Zora saw it in the faint narrowing of his eyes. He leaned forward slightly, as if engaging more deeply in conversation with a guest beside him. But the movement brought him just enough to shift out of the direct line from the balcony. Small. Careful. Effective. The toxin hit him again. Zora saw it in the subtle tightening of his shoulders, the brief flicker of discomfort that passed across his expression before disappearing. His breathing slowed further. Controlled. Disciplined. Renzo's gaze drifted once more across the room, then briefly, almost invisibly, toward Zora. Their eyes didn't fully meet. But the message passed anyway. He believed her. And now, he was playing along. Zora moved past his table, her tray balanced effortlessly, her posture calm. As she passed, she slowed just enough to let her presence register without drawing attention. Renzo's fingers shifted slightly against the table. Another subtle signal. He was ready. The assassins were still watching, still waiting for the moment he faltered. But Renzo wasn't giving it to them. Instead, he leaned back again, appearing relaxed, even slightly amused by the evening. The perfect illusion. The man near the balcony hesitated. For the first time since the signal, doubt entered his posture. The plan was slipping. And Zora realized something else in that moment. Renzo Lucia wasn't just surviving the poison. He was turning the trap around. And now, the room that had been designed to kill him was slowly becoming a cage for someone else. Renzo lifted his glass again. This time, he didn't drink. He only swirled the liquid slowly, the motion casual, almost bored. To anyone watching, it looked like a man losing interest in an expensive champagne. But Zora saw the strategy. If he didn't drink again, the assassins would notice. If he drank too much, the toxin would overwhelm him faster. So he balanced between the two, appearing natural while buying time. The man near the balcony shifted again. Uncertain. Zora moved through the crowd, her pace steady, offering drinks to a small group gathered near the marble pillar. Laughter rose around her, light and unaware. The music softened, the violin blending into the quiet hum of conversation. The gala continued. As if no one was slowly hunting someone else. Renzo leaned slightly toward the man seated beside him, nodding at something said. But his right hand slid subtly along the table, tapping once, then twice. His bodyguard adjusted position again, drifting closer to the balcony side without drawing attention. Zora noticed. He was tightening the perimeter. Smart. Across the room, the woman in crimson stepped toward the bar, her heels clicking softly against the marble. Her expression was calm again, but the tension remained in her shoulders. She was recalibrating. Zora intercepted her path, stepping forward with a gentle smile. Champagne? The woman paused, her eyes flicking briefly toward Zora's face. There was a moment, brief, sharp, where Zora felt herself being assessed. Then the woman smiled. Of course. She selected a glass, her fingers steady. But Zora noticed the subtle glance she cast toward Renzo before turning away. Still watching. Still waiting. Zora moved on. Her heartbeat remained steady, but her senses sharpened further. She circled the room again, catching reflections, reading posture, tracking movement. Renzo shifted in his chair. A slight movement. But this time, his fingers tightened against the table. The toxin was still working. Zora felt a flicker of concern. He was controlling it well, but the poison wasn't waiting. Every second stretched the risk further. The man near the balcony checked his watch again. Then his hand slipped into his sleeve. Metal glinted. Zora's pulse tightened. He was preparing to act. Renzo noticed too. Without looking directly, he leaned back slightly, his chair angling just enough to place a passing guest between himself and the balcony. Shield. Casual. Effective. Zora stepped closer to Renzo's table, offering drinks to a nearby group. As she passed behind him, she slowed slightly. His breathing was still controlled. But slower now. Measured carefully. He was pushing through it. Zora moved on, her tray balanced as she approached the bar again. The waiter from earlier stood nearby, pretending to polish glasses. His movements were too careful, too deliberate. Another participant. Zora filed it away. The room felt tighter now, like a web slowly pulling inward. Renzo leaned forward, engaging in conversation again, his expression calm, composed. But his eyes moved constantly, scanning reflections, tracking motion. He wasn't just defending anymore. He was hunting. The woman in crimson returned to her earlier position, her posture subtly angled again. The man near the balcony adjusted his stance, tension building in his shoulders. They were running out of patience. Zora passed Renzo once more. Their proximity lasted only a second. But Renzo's fingers brushed the edge of the table, a small, deliberate movement. Ready. Zora continued walking, her pulse steady despite the pressure building around her. The game had changed. They were no longer reacting. They were baiting. And somewhere in the room, the assassins were beginning to realize. Their perfect plan was unraveling. They just didn't know how quickly it was about to collapse. The shift came suddenly. The man near the balcony stopped pretending. Zora saw it first in his shoulders, the controlled stillness giving way to decision. His hand slid from his sleeve, the small metallic device now fully visible in his palm, concealed only by the angle of his body. He wasn't waiting anymore. Renzo hadn't collapsed. Which meant the poison had failed, or been compromised. Either way.
They were moving to back up. Stay steady despite the spike of adrenaline racing through her chest. The room still hummed with quiet laughter, unaware of the silent escalation unfolding beneath the surface. Then Renzo shifted. Subtle. Intentional. He leaned forward as if to stand. The man at the balcony reacted instantly. His hand tightened around the device. Trigger ready. Zora's pulse thundered. This was it. Renzo paused halfway, his posture wavering just enough to sell weakness. His right hand pressed briefly against the table, his breathing slightly uneven. A perfect illusion. The assassin took the bait. He stepped away from the balcony, moving with quiet precision through the crowd. Guests barely noticed him, their attention fixed on conversations and drinks. To anyone else, he looked like another wealthy attendee changing positions. But Zora saw the direct line he was creating. Toward Renzo. Across the room, the woman in crimson shifted as well, subtly clearing the path. Her smile remained bright, but her eyes tracked the movement carefully. The final alignment. Renzo lowered himself back into his chair, his head dipping slightly as if dizziness had finally caught up with him. The assassin accelerated. 3 steps. 2. Zora moved closer, her heart pounding, but her face calm. She offered drinks to a nearby couple, placing herself just close enough to witness what would happen next. The assassin's hand lifted slightly, the metallic device now angled forward. Close-range delivery. Silent. Fast. Renzo's bodyguard started to move, but Renzo lifted a finger. Wait. He was still playing. The assassin closed the distance, stepping within a few feet of Renzo's table. His eyes hardened, his focus locked. He raised his hand. And then, Renzo moved. Faster than Zora expected. His left hand shot forward, gripping the edge of the table as he shifted sideways, knocking his chair slightly off balance. The sudden movement disrupted the assassin's aim. At the same instant, Renzo's bodyguard lunged. The assassin reacted, triggering the device. A faint hiss cut through the air. The guest beside Renzo stumbled backward, confusion flashing across his face as the device discharged harmlessly into empty space. The room froze. Someone dropped a glass. The sharp crack echoed loudly across the marble floor. The assassin turned to retreat, but Renzo's second bodyguard was already there. A firm grip locked onto the assassin's wrist, twisting sharply. The metallic device clattered to the floor, sliding across polished marble. The woman in crimson moved. Too quickly. Zora saw her pivot toward the exit, abandoning her role entirely. Renzo noticed. Even weakened, his gaze snapped toward her. Her, he said quietly. One word. Cold. Final. Another guard intercepted the woman before she reached the exit. Her smile vanished instantly, replaced by cold calculation as she attempted to twist free. But it was too late. The room erupted into confusion. Guests stepped back, voices rising, security closing in. The illusion of a calm gala shattered in seconds. The assassin near Renzo struggled briefly, then went still, his expression empty.
Caught.
Renzo leaned back slowly, his breathing controlled, but heavier now. The toxin was still affecting him, but he had survived the final strike. Zora exhaled quietly, tension finally loosening in her chest. The trap had sprung, and the hunters had just become the captured. Renzo's chair scraped softly against the marble floor as he straightened, the faint stiffness in his right hand betraying the lingering effect of the toxin. He breathed steadily, each inhalation deliberate, measured, as if he were recalibrating himself after the chaos. Around him, the room was in stunned disarray. Guests whispered nervously, unsure what they had witnessed, their laughter and polite conversation now hollow echoes. Zora moved toward the side of the table, still holding her tray, still pretending to serve. But the pretense no longer mattered. Every eye in the room that had ignored her before now flicked toward her. The invisible waitress had vanished, replaced by someone who had just tilted the balance of life and death in the heart of a mafia empire. Renzo's gaze finally fell on her. Not fully, not openly, but long enough for her to feel the weight of it. The sharp calculation behind his eyes was unmistakable. He understood everything she had done. The audacity, the intelligence, the cold precision of her risk. And he wasn't angry. Instead, there was something else. Respect, recognition, interest. The man in the gray suit and the woman in crimson had been escorted from the room, their plans dismantled, their authority challenged. Security and guards moved to secure the perimeter, but no one dared question the young man who sat at the center of it all. He had survived an attempt on his life by remaining perfectly still, perfectly measured, and by trusting the warning of a waitress who had just risked everything to reach him. Renzo lifted his glass again. He didn't drink. The gesture was deliberate, almost ceremonial, a silent acknowledgement of survival and of the new order forming in that room. Zora felt a subtle shift in the air around them, the current of power now flowing differently. "Step closer," he said softly, his voice barely audible above the murmur of the recovering crowd. Zora froze for a heartbeat. This was dangerous. He could have mistaken her boldness for insolence. He could have struck, but the subtle tilt of his head told her otherwise. She moved forward, careful to maintain the guise of calm, her expression unreadable. The moment she was close enough, Renzo's eyes flicked over her, sharp and calculating. "You've done something very few people in this room could even imagine," he said, his tone low, deliberate.
Zora kept her head down, pretending to adjust the tray, but she felt the undeniable shift in their dynamic. No longer was she a shadow moving silently between tables. No longer was she simply part of the background. She had entered his world, safely, yes, but as someone who had proven herself capable, audacious, and intelligent under extreme pressure. The room itself seemed to bend around this new reality. Conversations continued, but with caution. Guests were more aware of the eyes that now held true command. Guards and attendants exchanged subtle nods. Whispers spread like fire, something had changed. Renzo's gaze lingered on her just long enough to send a clear message: her place had shifted. From invisible observer to indispensable player. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a part of the calculus now. Someone who could not be ignored. Zora exhaled quietly, letting the tension drain just slightly from her shoulders. The adrenaline still hummed through her veins, but a new clarity had replaced the fear. The stakes had changed, the roles had shifted, and the invisible had become undeniable. Renzo lifted his hand, a subtle, almost imperceptible signal. Zora understood immediately. She was no longer just surviving the room. She had survived him, and in doing so, earned a place in a world where power was everything, and visibility was dangerous but now, essential. The gala continued around them, oblivious, but Zora's life had been rewritten in the span of a single, unthinkable night. And nothing, from this moment forward, would ever be the same.